Breaking news, Iran expanding its retaliation on American assets across the Gulf after the U.S. overnight launched its largest wave of strikes in weeks. President Trump today rejected Iran's claim the Strait of Hormuz is closed and says Tehran agreed to a deal on Saturday, giving up its nuclear program before it attacked a ship in the Strait. Iran denied agreeing to any new deal. Here's what lawmakers said about the state of Trump's war today.
It's very difficult to see the way out of what has become a kind of a quagmire. This memorandum of understanding was so vague that you see all the problems with essentially agreeing to agree in the future. Iran has realized that it has a kind of a nuclear weapon already, and that is the ability with minimal force to close the Strait of Hormuz.
I imagine that Iran probably got hit harder last night than they've ever been hit before, and they're going to feel the pain. They're going to come back to the table and beg President Trump to stop the strikes, to stop military action, because it's been very effective.
Joining me now is Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton. He serves on the Foreign Affairs, Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. Congressman, welcome. It's good to talk with you. Before we get into some other details, your reaction to the sudden passing of Senator Lindsey Graham last night. And again, he just turned 71 on Thursday.
It's really shocking. Senator Graham was obviously a very active member of the United States Congress on the Senate side. And, I represent Arizona, and we know that Lindsey Graham and our great Senator John McCain spent a lot of time together, did good policy together, traveled the world together, stood up for freedom. And so we appreciate him for that. Obviously, after the death of Senator McCain, Lindsey Graham turns towards Donald Trump, which I think was a step in the wrong direction. But we do appreciate his close working relationship with Senator McCain and his strong, stalwart support for the people of Ukraine during this challenging time. We appreciate his fight for freedom.
Yeah, that's certainly part of his legacy, for sure. Let's talk about the ceasefire in Iran, sir, which appears to be hanging by a thread, if it still even exists. The U.S. launched 3 rounds of airstrikes this week over Iranian attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz, as both sides refused to back down over control of the waterway, and President Trump and Iran's supreme leader are trading threats of annihilation. What is the administration's next move here? And do you worry we could be entering some sort of a period of neither war nor peace and just constant back and forth hostilities and, I guess, attempts at negotiations in between?
What's critical that the Strait of Hormuz be open under any circumstances. Of course, the Strait was open before Donald Trump entered into this war of choice, which was a horrific, horrific decision. Number one, the president never should have left the Iran nuclear deal during his first term. We would have been in so much of a better position if we had just stayed in that important agreement because of the accountability measures in there. He gets us out of that. He comes back for another term, and then he enters this war of choice, and Iran discovers that they can fairly easily shut down the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, even under the MOU that was signed, the president immediately gave up the sanctions on Iranian oil and even stated in the MOU that Iran could charge fees for future ships that cross the Strait of Hormuz, making it not really open. So it is a terrible, terrible situation right now. And this president and his team needs to get back to the negotiating table with Iran and create an agreement in which we don't give away the store on the front end, that Iran has to build up trust and accountability over time. And we, over time, would then release the sanctions. But right now, we are in one heck of a difficult spot.
Yeah, for sure. So on Saturday, the most comprehensive housing legislation in decades became law, despite President Trump refusing to sign it. This in protest of the Senate not passing his so-called elections integrity bill. The landmark legislation aims to increase housing supply, bring down costs, including by limiting those institutional investors from purchasing certain single-family homes. But what does it say about the president's priorities that he treated lowering housing costs for working families as leverage for his elections fight?
I mean, what a joke. A presidential temper tantrum to not give a photo op to members of both parties, I guess, at a signing ceremony for this very important piece of legislation, which I strongly support. And what was the point? The bill became law anyway. It is the law of the land. It is a good bill that will increase housing supply in America. It'll make it easier to create more housing and create more financing options for families. I wish there was even more support on the demand side as well, but this is a bipartisan bill, so everyone has to compromise and sacrifice to get a good bill done. But to see the president essentially have a temper tantrum because he didn't get some other bill that he wanted that really has no chance of passing, it's just, I think, president using his powers for the very worst, I guess. It's not presidential leadership at all.
Let's talk about those 3 men who were arrested during a Houston immigration operation that ended in the fatal shooting of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo. And they're disputing key elements of the DHS's account of what happened, according to the Washington Post. Those men say, sir, that ICE officers shot Salgado Araujo almost immediately after exiting his vehicle, and at no point did he veer in the officer's direction. So how is the public supposed to trust ICE's version of this shooting when the agents were not wearing body cameras and local investigators are saying they were denied normal access to the scene?
I don't think the American people will believe ICE's account of what happened with the tragedy of Lorenzo Araujo losing his life, just like ICE turned out to be giving not accurate information after the tragic murder of Alex Preddy and Nicole Good. Our fellow Americans were killed by ICE officers, and their account turned out to be very different than what the video evidence produced. So it's very important that the city of Houston be able to do an independent investigation, get to the bottom of it, gather all the facts, talk to witnesses. I don't think ICE is going to be able to put anything, sweep it under the rug, if you will. There needs to be accountability, and the facts need to come to light. And I think the American people are going to be very skeptical of ICE's assertion of what the facts are in this tragic case.
So, Congressman, you have released a new report detailing that FEMA staffers are being told to work on immigration enforcement, which the report says is straining the agency's ability to respond to disasters. Now, a DHS spokesperson called that report false and said there are no FEMA employees working on immigration raids or arrests or deportations. But what's going on here?
I'll tell you exactly what's going on. ICE, which has been given $70 billion by the Republicans in Congress, all Democrats voted against giving those additional resources. They don't need $70 billion. We need real reform. We need to change the way ICE is engaging with the public. We just talked about the tragedy in Houston. It's sadly and tragically another example of why ICE needs to change the way they go about their business. But yes, whistleblowers, courageous whistleblowers came forward and provided irrefutable evidence that they're using FEMA and the technical skills that FEMA had for logistics and organizing and planning and using those employees, detailing those employees over to ICE to help plan for immigration raids and to set up these detention centers around the United States of America. Now, they're doing this at a time when we're in hurricane season. There could be a natural disaster tomorrow. And FEMA, the agency that is supposed to help our fellow Americans during times of natural disaster and tragedies, will not be as prepared. So those key employees are being detailed over to ICE, and FEMA is not even being reimbursed for that time, which is illegal under federal law as well. And thank goodness there was courageous whistleblowers who came forward and willing to risk a lot of their careers. They were at risk for coming forward and providing this important information.
Do you expect, sir, to do some further investigation into this? I mean, what can come of the knowledge that you have?
Okay, 2 things. Number 1, we hope additional whistleblowers will come forward. By the way, not just in FEMA, but other agencies where they see this administration engage in illegal activities. And then I'm a Democrat. We are going to win the majority in this year's election, and we will have subpoena power and the ability to engage in much more thorough investigation beyond what the whistleblowers were able to provide. Now, the whistleblowers provided rock solid evidence for the basis of the report. As you noted, ICE did not refute the evidence that was provided. They just did a blanket denial. Well, I think people are skeptical of that answer. Look at the facts in the actual report. But yes, we need more information from more employees that have specific information about instances of key employees being detailed to non-FEMA related duties. And in the very near future, we will have subpoena power as well.
Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton, thank you so much for your time with us. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Have a good Sunday.
Thank you.